My Gavanin, how are you doing? I'm the Tolkien Shed, and today we begin our adventure. In this first part, we'll set the stage and the stakes. It will cover mostly the same areas as episodes 1 and 2 of the Rings of Power, so A Shadow of the Past and Adrift. Without any further ado, let's do it! Let's rewrite the Rings of Power. So, what are the main issues with the first 2 episodes of the Rings of Power? First of all, Galadriel. Just Galadriel. We cannot have her like that. She must be somewhat likable, and in order to achieve that, we'll have to change some of her characteristics and give other ones some justification. Another issue is the matter of time and space. Even if we forget about the lore and the fact that Galadriel decided to swim across the whole Great Sea, we still have the time and space so tangled with the travels to Numenor and Valinor that something has to be done. The third issue is the issue with the news. The news about the attack on the Southlands never reached the High King Gil-galad, and this is also the question that must be resolved. There are also others, for example, characterization of Elrond or the stranger Gandalf, some decisions that characters make, the fact that a forge in Eregion is being built for no apparent reason. All of these will receive its solutions, maybe not full solutions, not yet. This is still a developing story, but here we will give some good foundations for further developments. So, let's go! We begin with Galadriel, who tells us the story of the elves in the First Age. We hear about their life in Valinor. We hear how they left the Blessed Realm and how they fought Morgoth in Middle-earth. We hear the story of Finrod, Galadriel's brother, and about his death. We hear about Celeborn, Galadriel's husband, who went missing years ago. Galadriel does not lose hope to one day find him, but it is not easy. And there are other duties that await her. For even though Morgoth was defeated and Sauron disappeared, their servants still trouble the world. So, after this exposition, we jump into action and we see Galadriel commanding great forces of the elves in the north. They are hunting for orcs, who for the most part have lived there for many years. We see Galadriel not as a warrior that goes on lonely adventures, but as a commander, a leader of great armies that must put her forces into best use. Throughout a series of reports, she learns that the orcs that have lived in the north now move south. Their direct objective is unknown, but it soon becomes clear that in a short time there will be no orc to be found in the north. Galadriel decides to send messengers to the Southlands, where some of the elven scouts still dwell, and she herself writes to Lindon, to High King Gil-galad, to inform him about the situation and to discuss further plans. Because we have just learned about the danger that may come to the Southlands, we move right there. We get to know Arondir and his friends, that are scouts in this far land, and the people that they protect. Bronwyn, Theo, Waldreg, all of the villagers. We begin to understand the relationship between Arondir and Bronwyn. We see their warm feelings and how they treat each other. Nothing serious happens. Yet. Here we get a short scene of Galadriel and her guards riding to Lindon, because showing the distance and time that it takes to travel is important. Then we set the stage for the hobbits. We get to know new characters, Snorri, Sadok, Poppy, and all others. Nothing unusual. After some time that we spend with them, we move to Lindon, and we see Galadriel arriving there. She meets Elrond and talks to him about her adventures, the news, and about her unsuccessful search for Celeborn. She shows us that she's worried, and Elrond gives her his support. And then it is shown how Galadriel becomes a bit more stern when she is preparing for the meeting with the king. In the next scene, we see messengers coming to the Southlands. The scouts, Arondir between them, are ordered to look out for the signs of the enemy. Then we get one more sequence to get familiar with the hobbits. We see their day-to-day activities, their customs, and we become more attached to our characters. Then we see the Council of Gil-galad. Among his several advisors there are Elrond and Galadriel. The council decides to send Galadriel and some elven forces to monitor the situation in the south. The task is to look out for the enemy, to warn the Númenóreans that live on the coast, and to protect the Southlanders. They will stay in the south until there is something more discovered or the orcs are defeated. Galadriel is granted much authority to make decisions quick. For most matters, she is not obliged to consult the king. Not everyone agrees with this decision, not everyone believes that she should be granted such freedom. But after a long discussion, that decision remains the same. Soon after, we see Arondir and his companions pick up the trail of a group of orcs. The scouts set out to discover where the orcs are going. Along the way, the friends discuss the relation between Arondir and Bronwyn. Meanwhile, in the village, Theo and one of his friends observe Waldrek, who behaves suspiciously. Apparently he goes somewhere and does not want to be seen. They follow him from a distance and arrive at an old barn, but before they are able to discover what is hidden there, Waldrek hears them, so they leave before he finds them. In Lindon, Elrond is introduced to Celebrimbor. They are both assigned the task of building a forge in Eregion, the southernmost elven city. The forge is meant to support the war effort in the south. The idea of building the forge to support the war effort was first conceived by Bug Fennes. I'll talk more about his channel a bit later. As Galadriel, Elrond and Celebrimbor set out, as Arondir and his companions are on their way, and as Theo and his friend arrive in their village, there appears a great light in the sky, and we end the first episode the same as A Shadow from the Past ended. A man from the sky strikes the ground near the Hobbit camp. We begin the second episode with Nori and Poppy finding the stranger in the crater of fire. The stranger seems to have control over powers of nature, especially fire. Then we have a while for bonding time between the scouts that follow the orcs in the Southlands. Next is the scene of Celebrimbor and Elrond arriving in Eregion. We follow with Nori and Poppy trying to communicate with the stranger, but he seems to know only one language. If Nori and Poppy were linguists, they would call it Elvish, but to them it could be perfect Orcish as well. Then Arondir and his friends leave the Southlands. By the mountains that are the border of these lands, they find the orcs that they followed arriving at a great camp. There are thousands of orcs there, and they could easily conquer the Southlands in a matter of days. The elves decide to return to the Southlands and inform their king about the danger. Several miles away, Theo is spying on somebody too. He and his friends have been observing Waldrek for some time, and now they are sure that this night will not be at the barn, so soon they will try to find out what is hidden there. After a short scene of the stranger learning his first words in common speech very quickly, we find Elrond and Celebrimbor in Eregion. They discuss many problems that they have, the main one being not enough workers. Most of the elves are preparing for the war in the south, so there are no enough hands to build the forge. Elrond, with some hesitation, proposes to ask dwarves that live nearby for help. After a day's journey, our two elves arrive in Moria. Then we get our first scene with Galadriel in this episode. She is getting close to the Southlands when she hears news that the Queen Regent Miriel is coming to Pelargir, a colony of Númenóreans on the coast. She decides to go there and meet the Queen and discuss with her the danger that is coming to the south. In the Southland village, Theo goes to the barn and discovers there a menacingly looking sword. He takes it for himself. In Moria, Elrond and Celebrimbor are received quite coldly. Elrond reveals that he has suspected such turn of events because he hasn't heard from his friend Durin for a few years. But even he is shocked when he learns that he and Celebrimbor will be expelled from the Dwarven Kingdom forever. Elrond does not give up. He reveals that he has not come as a visitor, but as a messenger of the High King Gil-galad, so Durin must listen to him, despite any grudge that he may hold. The dwarves are not happy, but they agree to arrange a meeting between Elrond and Durin. Then we see Galadriel, who has left most of her forces somewhere else. She arrives in Pelargir, where she meets Halbrand, an outsider, which is visible in his posture, clothes and even language, who is treated surprisingly highly by the Númenóreans. Even though he comes from the Southlands, he has become one of the leaders of the colony. He is a charismatic young man who, together with the whole city, awaits the arrival of the Queen in few days. The episode ends with Elrond getting ready for the meeting with Durin. He sees Celebrimbor, who is very curious about dwarven minds. Elrond starts to suspect that they have come not only as visitors, nor even as messengers, but also as spies. Now let's quickly summarize the changes that were introduced. First of all, we never go to Númenor or Valinor. Instead, we have Pelargir. There we can meet any character that we want. With the arrival of Miriel, any Númenorian could come to this colony, but we avoid the troublesome questions related to space and time. It is also a solution that is true to the lore. When it comes to Galadriel, there is a slight change to her role. She is not a warrior with just 8 companions, but a commander of the northern army of the elves. She also looks for her husband. So, with this new responsibility of an entire army and with search for her husband Celeborn, we can justify some of her bitterness. With other matters, there are news exchange between places and people. There is no occupational force in the Southlands, which avoids the question, why do they stay there for 1,000 years? Arondir is not yet captured because orcs are not in the Southlands yet. There is still time to develop the character of Arondir, his relationships, and maybe show some tensions between the few elves that are in the Southlands and the men that dwell there. There is also different characterization of the stranger, Gandalf, who is really a stranger in a new land, but he is a bit more competent. There is some setup for another part of this series where we will resolve the meeting of Elrond and Durin. Here was just a setup. There was also setup for the search for Mithril by the elves. Celebrimbor is looking for it in the dwarven mines, and it will not come out of nowhere. And finally, there is the fort in Eregion. Now we have a reason for it to be built, and there is time constraint, there is war coming. As I have already said, it is not my idea. I have borrowed it from Book Fairness. When I was preparing for this video, I found his, and it was entertaining, inspiring, and interesting. So I invite you to check it out and to check out his whole channel. I believe that I have provided a solid foundation for further discussion, but it is only the beginning. All that is great and fun remains ahead. And now I want to ask you, what do you think about these propositions? Are there sound? Are there good? Are there any weaknesses? Are there any plot holes? What would you do instead? What would you like to be discussed more? And what was the matter that I have discussed too much? Please share your thoughts, and as I have said, I'll read all the comments and present the relevant ones in the final episode of this series. Now all that is left is to thank you for listening. I once more recommend Book Fairness for you, and I hope to see you again very soon. Fare you well, Novayer. In Moria, Celebrimbor and Elrond. First of all, we never go to Valinor or Númenor. Because we have just learned about the danger that may come to the Southlands,
Subscribe right now, you little hobbitses.